Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom.
In our top story, incoming U.S. President Donald Trump will reportedly support an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear program, or he will order an American strike himself. Axios News has reported that Ron Dermer, Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, recently met with the president-elect at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Miami. He reportedly told the news site that President Trump is determined to destroy Tehran's rogue nuclear program before it's too late. The article notes that President Trump would prefer to secure a nuclear deal with Iran before resorting to a preemptive attack. Iran's foreign minister has already reached out to Trump's transition team, signaling the radical Shiite regime is prepared to restart negotiations with the United States.
Outgoing U.S. Secretary of Defense Antony Blinken admitted that international pressure on Israel emboldened Hamas not to release the hostages. Blinken told the New York Times that the Iranian-backed terror group could have ended the war by releasing the hostages, but instead, Hamas chose to exploit the plight of Gazans and spread the war to other fronts. The top diplomat in the administration of President Joe Biden lamented the international community's obsession with the so-called humanitarian situation in Gaza while remaining silent on the fate of the hostages. He said the absence of world pressure on Hamas to surrender and release the hostages has been astounding.
Jerusalem has rejected the United Nations nominee for incoming special envoy to Israel. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres tapped Finland's former foreign minister, Pekka Haavisto, for the position, but Israel rejected the nomination, citing his harsh criticism of the Jewish state. Haavisto was meant to replace Tor Winnesland, who served as UN envoy to Israel for 4 years. The Norwegian diplomat announced his departure in December, accusing the international community of failing to achieve meaningful political solutions in the region. Winnesland told the New York Times that short-term humanitarian relief in Gaza took precedence over lasting political resolutions. He said the international community misjudged Hamas's intentions and that politics, diplomacy, and the international community have failed.
Incoming U.S. President Donald Trump announced that he's planning to slap crippling sanctions against the International Criminal Court. Sources close to the president confirmed that executive orders penalizing the Kangaroo Court will be enforced immediately after Trump returns to the White House. These punitive measures will be directed toward individual judges and prosecutors and the notoriously corrupt organization as a whole. The Hague has issued international arrest warrants for Israeli leaders, prompting several countries to pursue alleged war crimes against individual Israeli citizens. These actions are viewed as an attempt to strip the United States and its allies of their ability to mount a military defense against global threats. President Trump vowed to punish the ICC for its biased and anti-Semitic rulings. Jerusalem has issued a series of advisories to off-duty soldiers traveling internationally, warning them that they could be arrested and detained while vacationing abroad. Rebekah has more on that.
Yes, Yochanan, Jerusalem has issued travel advisories for several countries after an Israeli soldier narrowly escaped arrest in Brazil last week. The soldier was vacationing when he learned that the Brazilian federal court had launched an investigation into allegations of war crimes in Gaza. Israel's foreign ministry cautioned Israelis to avoid travel to Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Ireland, as well as several European countries that have expressed strong anti-Israel sentiments and a willingness to uphold the ICC's international arrest warrants for Israeli citizens.
Israeli leaders are urging the Knesset to crack down on Arab terror throughout the biblical heartland in the wake of another murderous attack in Judea and Samaria. Israel's Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, insisted that Israel halt all cooperation with the Palestinian Authority. He called for increased security checkpoints throughout the region. Communications Minister Shlomo Karhi penned a letter to Cabinet Secretary Yossi Fuchs demanding an immediate and uncompromising return to the war against terror. The U.S. Senate Budget Committee has announced the discovery of thousands of documents proving that Credit Suisse Bank concealed information about accounts controlled by the Nazis. In 1998, the financial institution agreed to participate in a $1.25 billion lawsuit filed by Holocaust survivors. However, the banking facility was less than forthcoming about its dealings with the Nazis. The Senate panel discovered tens of thousands of previously undisclosed documents that had a high relevance rate of Nazi connections. This includes numerous accounts controlled by senior SS officers and accounts that were used to sell stolen Jewish assets during the war.
A delegation of more than 800 teenagers from France visited the Jewish state to volunteer and show their support for Israel. The youth packed food boxes for the needy, worked with Israeli first responders, volunteered in the agricultural sector, and even worked at an IDF logistics base. The teams participated in panel discussions on rising anti-Semitism in France and how to advocate for the Jewish state. Participants said they experienced an incredible combination of social action and learning about Israel.
The White House has announced that it is prepared to approve an $8 billion military aid package to Israel. Both the House of Representatives and the Senate must okay the deal, which includes air-to-air missiles for fighter jets, drones, artillery shells, Hellfire missiles for attack helicopters, joint direct attack munitions kits, and 500-pound bombs. Previously, the Biden administration withheld weapons from the Jewish state as it fought a war for its survival on 7 fronts. President Trump has assured Israel that the U.S. will reinstate the flow of weapons on the day he takes office. Nevertheless, Israel has learned that it must decrease its foreign reliance. Jerusalem has signed several local contracts that will bolster its internal defense industry. Israel's Ministry of Defense announced that it made a deal with Elbit Systems to build heavy bombs and to establish a factory to produce raw materials in the Jewish state. The new facility is expected to strengthen domestic manufacturing independence and reduce reliance on imported materials.
The Jewish state has launched its first domestically built quantum computer. This 20-qubit supercomputer was jointly developed by the Israel Innovation Authority, Israel Aerospace Industries, and Hebrew University. It employs the use of advanced superconducting technology, which will be used in both defense and civilian applications. IAI CEO Boaz Levy explained that quantum technologies are set to fundamentally elevate human capabilities, spanning a wide range of fields, and he said that Israel Aerospace Industries is proud to lead Israel toward becoming a global quantum power.
Hundreds of pro-Hamas demonstrators gathered outside a New York City hospital calling for the destruction of the Jewish state. The crowds waved Palestinian and Lebanese flags, as well as banners supporting anarchist groups. The protests were timed to coincide with a so-called sit-in strike organized by the group Healthcare Workers for Palestine. Participants were advised to wear masks to prevent their identification, as they called for a violent intifada and the destruction of the Jewish state. President Trump has vowed to put an end to the anti-Israel protests that have taken college campuses and now hospitals by storm. He warned that any U.S. citizen involved in supporting terror would be arrested, and foreigners who display support for Hamas will be deported.
The Israel Antiquities Authority announced the discovery of one of the most breathtaking mosaics ever found in Israel. The IAA was conducting routine excavations ahead of the construction of a new neighborhood in Kiryat Gat when it uncovered an ancient Christian city. Archaeologists found remains of at least 10 Byzantine-era buildings, including a monastery and a wine press. In the entrance of the monastery, they unearthed an intricate mosaic floor depicting lions, doves, flowers, and a quote from the book of Deuteronomy. It said, "Blessed are you when you come in, and blessed are you when you go out." The IAA is planning to move the mosaic to an open area in the city to be displayed for the public.
The Knesset hosted a ceremony honoring dozens of leaders from around the world who have heroically defended Israel since October 7th. Member of Knesset Danny Luz officiated the Voices of Iron Award ceremony. He highlighted the importance of the work of the Israel Allies Foundation and praised IAF President Josh Reinstein for his tireless advocacy for the Jewish state through faith-based diplomacy. Reinstein said he was honored to be recognized among the defenders of Israel. He vowed to continue working with Bible-believing Christian communities around the world in order to turn their biblical support into real political action. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Pierre Rehov. He's a legendary filmmaker, and he's here to speak about his new film, Pogroms. Pierre, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell our viewers a little about what is the movie Pogroms?
First of all, it's a film about October 7, but it's not looking at October 7 the same way other films do, because what I wanted to do was to put October 7 in the context of a much larger historical hatred of Jews within the Muslim world and other parties, should we say. And the film tries to explore this history of massacres and pogroms that happened in the past and the connection between Muslims of the region of Palestine with the Nazis and later on with the communists. So this whole context had to be explained, and I wanted to do it.
It's interesting, the title, because when you think of October 7th, you think of a war crime. You don't think of a pogrom, but it was a pogrom. It was a pogrom like for any distance. But also what happened in Holland was a pogrom.
Absolutely.
So how do you explain pogroms as the general phrase for it?
The term pogrom was invented at the end of the 19th century because of what was going on in Poland and Russia and Ukraine and other places where Jews were pogromized, were massacred by local population. And basically, in a pogrom, you have the intention, the target, and the action. So in this case, there was the intention of massacre by Hamas. The target were Jews. It doesn't matter, Israelis, not Israelis, Jews in general, eventually other people who happened to be there. And they did it. They committed this massacre. So for me, it was a pogrom. And I know about a lot of other pogroms throughout Muslim history.
What's unique about this film is you go into the context. Where did this all come from? And where is this all going? A lot of people are trying to make an excuse for October 7th. The anti-Semites of today are saying, oh, this didn't happen in a vacuum, and all these, very offensive ways to describe October 7th. But you go into the root of it, and you basically break it into three parts. Can you talk about that?
Oh, absolutely. The first part is about the pogrom itself, and as a respect to the people who suffered it, the victims, the people who lost families, I didn't want to go after them. I didn't want to disturb their peace. So I interviewed only analysts and first responders. I wanted in the first part of the film people to see what happened from the eyes of the people who arrived there, who saw the horror. But not the people who suffered it, because I wanted to first of all, there were many films made with them, and I wanted to leave them in peace. That's number one. The second part, as I explained, is about the history. Pogroms within the Muslim world, it happened so many times. It happened in Algiers, it happened in Tunisia, it happened in Morocco, it happened against Christians. It happened in Damour, in Lebanon. And it's very important to remind that, because what happened on October 7 also happened to Christians throughout the Middle East, every single where. And when you're talking about Damour, you're talking about 547 people who were massacred the same way Jews were massacred on October 7. So that, in a way, makes us brothers, Christians and Jews, because of all those things that were suffering in the Middle East, and people have to be aware of it.
October 7th was so brutal that when you try to do a documentary about it, it's almost impossible. So you have to pull back so much of what happened, because you can't show that.
No, we can't.
You can't show that on TV, yet it still was graphic, the documentary. Just knowing about it, I knew that what really happened was way, way worse. So the question is, do people go, after watching the film, walk away with the sense that this is what happened and it's not so bad?
Yeah, because I come from the world of fiction, and I know how to make things, to show things without saying them, to show things without showing them. if you, in a fiction film, if you show the monster, people are not interested anymore. You have to have the suspense. In this case, the monster is what Hamas did, and you have to suggest, and people actually are traumatized by what they hear and what they could have seen, but they don't see it. And it's important because we have to understand the suffering, the horror that happened on this very day.
I think what's really interesting is not just that you showed the source and what happened on October 7th and what the future will bring, but you also refer to pogroms as not just something that happens to Jews, which is usually traditionally how it's used, but there are hundreds of pogroms happening against other Muslims, against Christians in the Middle East, and that these will continue. Why is the word pogrom usually just associated with the attack of Jewish communities?
Well, because I think it's a question of statistics. I think the Jews are the ones who have been targeted the most in this singular, simple way. Yes, it happens also to other communities. It happens in Sudan right now. Every single day, people are being massacred in Darfur and southern Sudan, and that's terrible. But the Jews are the ones who have been always massacred just because they are Jews anywhere in the world for always the same reason, only because they are Jews. So yes, it's connected to the Jews because look, it happened to the Jews in Russia and Ukraine and Poland. Now it happened in Israel because of the Palestinians. And so where is it not going to happen? And it happened also, it almost happened in Amsterdam. This is a movement of a rebirth on anti-Semitism. And, anti-Semites are predators with a neurosis. And they are not normal people. You cannot deal with anti-Semite.
Pierre, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
I would say you have to understand what happened on October 7th, and you have to feel it, because if you don't do something about it, it might happen again and again and again. And what happens to the Jews always end up happening to Christians and to other people of other communities. So this film is showing you what really happened, in which context, and what is going to be the future of it. And I think you should have this knowledge and watch it.
Thank you, Pierre, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now the truth from Zion.
Iran views Syria as a crucial ally in the region. The alliance provides Iran with a direct land route through Iraq to Lebanon, where its proxy army Hezbollah controls the country. This advantage gives Iran a much greater hold over the Middle East. Since the early stages of the Syrian conflict in 2011, Iran has played a significant role in propping up the government of the war-ravaged country. This support has grown dramatically over the years, leading to a dangerous geopolitical dynamic, and it's pouring over into the Holy Land. Iran is doing all it can to support Assad because without his approval, the rogue Islamic Republic would have difficulty operating in Syrian territory. The United States and its allies have taken measures to counter Iran's influence in Syria. This includes economic sanctions and targeted military strikes against Iranian-backed forces. The international community, however, has been divided on how to address this complex issue. Some nations think having an open dialogue with Tehran is the best way to move forward, while others insist Iran must be dealt with from a position of strength and power.
As far as Iran goes, this is the single biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world.
Despite the U.S. State Department repeatedly labeling Iran as the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, the American government struck a controversial deal with the radical Shiite regime. The agreement called for the release of 5 imprisoned Americans in exchange for jailed Iranians and access to $6 billion in Iranian oil revenue that had been sanctioned due to Iran's illicit nuclear activities. The American prisoners held in Iran had been detained for alleged spying. Oil-rich Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and Bahrain are concerned about regional security, especially as information continues to leak out detailing Iran's ongoing work to enrich its uranium supply in order to produce weapons of mass destruction. It's important to note that Iran's involvement in Syria has significantly impacted the course of the Syrian civil war, and their support has been pivotal in helping the brutal Assad regime regain control of certain key territories. The Iranian payoff was moved from a South Korean account to a central bank in Qatar, which said the funds would only be released for humanitarian purposes. To say that Israel is skeptical of the deal would be an understatement. Critics argue the money sent to Iran will be channeled right back into supporting extremist groups and terrorist activities. Iran's presence in Syria is a major concern for Israel, with Iranian forces deployed near its border.
Iran is the #1 terror country around the world, spreading terror all around the world, including Syria. What they do in Syria is sending troops, sending revolutionary guards into Syria, sending ammunition in purpose to have militias in Syria and also to actually bypass through Syria to Lebanon and then in the end to attack Israel.
Iran has repeatedly threatened to wipe Israel off the map. For Israel, it's not just words. Israeli defense forces routinely strike targets on the other side of the border in an effort to safeguard its national security interest, prevent the transfer of weapons to terrorist groups, and counter growing Iranian influence. Iran also supports the Hamas terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip along Israel's southern border. Iran is surrounding the Jewish state by equipping and training Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and having its own forces inside Syria. Iran's military involvement in Syria has been substantial. The Ayatollahs have provided critical support to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, including paramilitary groups, weapons, and at times their own Revolutionary Guard forces. This has been instrumental in stabilizing the Assad regime and led to his brutal suppression of protests during the Syrian civil war. Assad's regime has also been accused of using chemical weapons against its own citizens, a violation of international law. The United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and numerous other countries want this dictator out of office. The exception, of course, is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. Recent reports show the IRGC is providing weapons and conducting training for various militant groups operating out of Syria. Most of the world does not know the extent to which the IRGC is involved, but Israel is keenly aware of it. After all, Israel and Syria share a border and have been to war in the past. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Today we're excited to be in Migdal HaEmek in the north of Israel, and what we're going to see today is the opening of a new home that's going to be assisting people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The ICEJ has been privileged to help with the establishment of this beautiful home, and we're here to bless it as the people begin to come.
I will tell you just a bit about this house, and first of all, thank you very much for your generous donation and help us to open that place. It was needed before the war, and it was started to establish before the war, and the war is coming, and now the needs is like here, really. We have 3 psychologists with different fields, like most about the trauma, most about EMDR, stuff like that. We have amazing crew of instructors that living here 24/7 and making all the non-formal relationship treatment, which is how to find the balance again, how to find the safe place again.
Since 1980, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a voice of Christian support for Israel and connected the global church to the land of the Bible. Headquartered in Jerusalem, the ICEJ has taken action to stand with Israel by caring for Holocaust survivors, helping Jewish families return home to Israel, providing bomb shelters, fighting anti-Semitism around the world, and by inviting Christians to discover Israel for themselves.
First of all, we are extremely privileged to be here today. Your nation deserves to live in peace and security, and
Amen.
we hope soon houses like that will not be needed anymore. But right now, we do everything to enable this Israel, this nation, to return back to normality as soon as possible. And we want to do the best what we can to help in that.
Amen.
It's a privilege for us.
Mazal tov. So we opened this house less than a month ago. We have an agreement with the Ministry of Defense, and we see many people that came from that field, from post-traumatic syndromes. Sometimes it's from recent time, from that war, and sometimes it's from different wars. That war is just resonated and brings it back to life sometimes. We see people in high level of anxiety. Something starts going wrong. They start having some post-traumatic symptoms. Psychoeducation is also part of it, to normalize it, to normalize what's happening, and to build the progress together, to explain how we treat with that, how we treat with post-trauma syndrome, and helps them to believe that they have the force to pass it. I feel blessed, and to know the Christian embassy, and to be able to see how many amazing things you're doing around the world. I feel that you are solid ground in a very shaky time for Israel in general. For me as Israeli citizens, for me as Jewish, you are very solid ground for us. And I want to thank you a lot.
After Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, the ICEJ has been actively standing with Israel and her people through advocacy and urgently needed aid projects. Now is the time for Christians to turn their love for Israel and the Jewish people into real action as never before. Your donation will help deliver bomb shelters to at-risk areas, provide necessary supplies for first responders, care for evacuees with food, shelter, clothing, and trauma care, and will eventually help rebuild these devastated communities. Visit ICEJUSA.tv to donate online or call 1-800-910-6355 and give your generous gift today.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.